Thank you. All right, I assume everyone can hear me. I have the coveted middle of the day after lunch when everybody's asleep slot, so wake up. All right. Today we're going to do open source software myths, okay? And so it's not going to be the more technical presentation of the day, but just to get on the same page and on the same book. What is open source software? We should all know this. This is any software that the code is available for you to not only look at, but to download and edit and, modify, submit, things like that, branch. And what is an enterprise? An enterprise, for what we're talking about here, is a for-profit business. And in our kind of realm here, it's going to be one of the larger for-profit type of businesses, usually with more than one location or a lot of people. And what we're going to cover is 4 of the major myths. And a myth, I know that English is a second or third or fourth language for a lot of the people in here. So when we say myth, we mean misconception and how you can counter that. All right, who am I? I'm Fred Posner. I'm a consultant, which is the worst word in the world. I love working with Kamailio. And my wife, who you saw for the last couple days, and I started a bakery in 2010 when I just decided that I needed a break from SIP, and then I'm back. But we have the bakery in Gainesville, Florida. Some contact information for me. How did I get such a beautiful, intelligent woman to stay with me? Well, open source lifestyle, right? Okay. And that's no myth. All right, so the first myth, open source is less secure. This is the one that you run into all the time. You might have a potential client, you might be trying to deploy something in your own business, and they'll say, but really open source, we need something that's more secure. There was an article written about 1.5 years ago from Mitel, and it was just slamming. And they wrote this article called The 6 Major Risks of Open Source Phone Systems, right? And it was hilariously bad. But one of the quotes that they put is that anyone with a computer and a little time can simply download the same source files you did, dig through them for vulnerabilities. The horror, right? I mean, my God, other people might be looking to find vulnerabilities. How this is less secure, I don't know. But this is the type of thing that people are being convinced of, that this makes things more vulnerable, less secure. By the way, they've taken down their article. There's been a lot of studies. All right, so the first thing is a myth that open source is less secure, proprietary software is more secure. There's security experts in this room. All software is vulnerable. Okay, there hasn't been software written that isn't vulnerable. And if they believe so, it's just because the vulnerabilities haven't been found yet. At no point will we ever say, wow, this is bulletproof software. It doesn't work. All right? We all know this by extreme example. And most of us have broken the software and have created our own vulnerabilities. So we can attest to this. But both open source and proprietary software has security vulnerabilities. Now, Black Duck software, their belief is that, and from the data that they collected, and the last time they published something like this was last year, but they're showing that out of the codes that they do, open source is actually less vulnerable than commercial code. But again, I think that's just as stupid of a statement as saying that open source is less secure. All software has vulnerabilities, right? So what we have to do as a community is just assume that whatever we're running has vulnerabilities and put additional measures into place to minimize any of our losses, right? And talks all day and all week have been going to that effect. Another myth that we have is that open source is not enterprise grade, right? It's not built for large enterprises. It's not built to handle the toughness that's needed for enterprise. It's not enterprise grade. Here's a quote: "We use thousands of open source projects to build scalable and reliable products. Small little search engine called Google. We consume and contribute tons of open source, so it's important for us to give back wherever possible." And that's a director of engineering for Walmart Labs, which is a small retailer, if anyone's heard of it, a little mom and pop. Not only is software open source software enterprise grade, it's enterprise proven. All right, some of the largest companies in the world rely on open source software. A lot of them we wish would be more open about which software they're using, but they rely on open source software. Large enterprise companies contribute to code and even publicly acknowledge that they're using open source. And 9 out of 10 Wall Street banks use open source in their daily lives. When you there's an open source survey that goes out now and then, and when they survey all the users and of open source software, the reasons that they choose open source is because of its stability and security, which is kind of enterprise grade right there. All right, money is also in there, but it's not even in the top 50% of reasons why they would choose it. Some examples of open source software that's not Kamailio. If you look at the web servers of the top websites, over 85% of them are open source, right? It's interesting to see since 2010 how Nginx has just kind of destroyed Apache's share on everything. If you can't tell, the red line is Nginx. The green line is Apache for our colorblind friends. The one that's going up is Nginx. One that's going down is Apache. The blue line, or this line here, that's IIS, which thankfully is going lower. And if we look at it in a very hard to read chart, you know, again, this is the breakdown of the web servers, right? So that's just the web servers we can see. You know, so most e-commerce transactions, everything like that, the server serving the information is open source. Okay, so to tell me that that's not enterprise grade, I think we have a quick, easy answer to show that they're wrong. If you look at MariaDB, so people say that, you know, well, you can't scale with enterprise grade, you know, well, Wikipedia, Google, and others use MariaDB. ServiceNow, something in Europe, they're running 25 billion queries an hour using MariaDB. Wikipedia, their English version, so not, you know, all of Wikipedia, but they break it down by language. The peak on a daily is 50,000 queries a second. All right, that's pretty decent. That's running open source. And so, you know, MariaDB is open source. Companies that need production and scalability, enterprise grade level, choose open source software. Now, instead of being red, I grayed out this myth. So open source is too difficult to use. And I grayed that out because you can say that really about anything. Okay, so open source software, I feel, is not more difficult or less difficult than sometimes having to know a concept. Okay, and we can't blame that, oh, well, you know, Kamailio is hard to use. Kamailio might be hard to use if you don't know SIP. If you know SIP, I think it's not that hard, right? Learning SIP was extremely hard. But, you know, here's another quote from that amazing article from Mitel. And they tried to say that one of those 6 major risks was knowledge. So with an open source phone system, your IT team will need to have more than an advanced knowledge of how to install and configure all the necessary components to bring the system to life. You know, because apt-get install is just brutal. Although Benjamin Franklin countered that with an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, right? So I don't know how you bypass knowledge. I mean, this goes back to what Alex was saying about the cloud and what others we've heard from today, where, you know, in some enterprise level, they feel that if I could just offload this, I can get rid of the people in my department that understand how it works. Okay, and so, you know, if I switch from Kamailio to, you know, Acme Packet, I guess I don't need any SIP knowledge, which, sadly, if any of us have dealt with some of the people handling the Oracle SBCs, is pretty apparent that that is their philosophy. So is open source really what's difficult? You know, I don't think so. You know, knowledge is power, and it's the concepts that are down, you know, getting the concepts down. The software itself seems less difficult. You know, the example I'd like to use is, I'm sure most of us have played with a web server, even on our own internal LAN or our own laptop or one time. And when I was running Apache, when I was first learning Apache, okay, the whole concept of virtual hosts and host headers and I got to put this in this bin and where's the 404 error go? It was very difficult for me because I had no knowledge of how just a web transaction worked. I'd never taken the time, and so I learned, like some of us did, through trial and error and setting things up and going, oh, look at that error, and then researching it and learning it. Before I knew it, I have a pretty good knowledge of how a web transaction might work, or just a website request and a response. So when I switched from Apache to Nginx, I was like, wow, this is really easy. And I don't think that Nginx was inherently easier. It's just that I didn't have to relearn these concepts. They kind of made sense just where even just by the example configuration, this just made sense because I'd already learned the concepts. So as far as learning software, if you know the concepts behind it, I don't think that knowledge is too difficult. But that being said, you have to learn. So that's why I have it as a gray. Another gray one here. Open source has no support. Okay, well, I don't think we have the best support model, but for fun, I called Cisco. And I called Cisco the other day, and I wanted to find out if they had any kind of free support. I told them, hey, I just bought this big CUCM, and what kind of support do I get? And they after being on hold for a while, they told me, I'm not quite sure, you'll have to ask your reseller, which I thought was awesome. I called Avaya and was told that support is only available for customers with an active maintenance agreement. I called Mitel, and I gave up after 20 minutes on hold, so I don't know. So they may very well offer free support, but I'm thinking that they probably don't. But so this kind of myth of where open source has no support needs more information, right? So it's something that we see, support is weak, support is bad. Well, I mean, if you want paid support, you can have paid support. So are we talking free support or just support? I mean, Kamailio, Asterisk, they're very well represented here, FreeSwitch as well, some of the other projects, generally have amazing free support. On IRC, GitHub, our mailing lists, the responses are incredibly quick. I mean, I don't know many issues that have to get bumped. Hey, nobody's really responding to my query. Sometimes it's like, hey, I just downloaded Kamailio, what do I do? Yeah, those might take a couple days to get a response because none of us seem to be jumping up on the plate there. But any legitimate request, any bug fix, any security fix, those seem to be handled really quick, and it's not a support contract, it's not something else. When we need help, there's a lot of documentation in Google. I mean, I don't know what I did 15 years ago, but I mean, Google today, if I Google an error, chances are I'm going to find even a tutorial on someone that went through the same thing. So these are very common in open source. Yet proprietary software and proprietary open source software, or proprietary software that we might quote unquote compete with has no free support model. None, right? And sometimes they don't even support it themselves. You have to go through a reseller, or you have to go through a service provider. Mitel's a huge one on that. Now, of course, you can also get paid support from open source. And others in the room might provide some as well. But there are people that provide themselves a living by supporting and consulting for open source projects. Now, this being said, and this is one of those ones where I wish Ole was still here so he could just scream and clap. We can do better in some of our documentation. There's always room for better documentation, and everyone in this room can help in documentation, and just to say that in a different way and read it as well. Everyone in this room needs to do and needs to help with documentation, and all of us, including me. Everyone in here, we've talked, for the last 2 days, incredible resources in this room. Everyone speaks well, everyone has an advanced knowledge that you can really help other people with sharing even just a little bit. If we all shared just a little bit, our documentation would be incredible. So we could do a little bit better, but I really think that compared to proprietary software, there's really not, oh wow, ours is poor documentation. I've seen the really thick books, and I've read through some of them on Cisco, and gosh darn it, no support would have been better than some of the conflicting support that you might have in some documentation from proprietary software. But these myths persist, and they've persisted with us for years, right? And so when I'm being tasked with a company, you know, a lot of times I've been very fortunate, and for the first start of my entrance into this, I didn't have to deal with these, because these were people that were very frustrated with Cisco, very frustrated with BroadSoft. My own story of how I got into open source, which I told last year, but was, you know, BroadSoft and Acme Packet were just so brutally, we had problems that they couldn't fix, and we resolved them quicker than support getting back to us by launching an OpenSARE at the time, right? So, so I've helped people alleviate themselves of those same problems by switching to open source. But lately, you're getting some naysayers and some people in the company that tell you these things. You know, well, why would I switch to Kamailio? You know, isn't that less secure? Or, you know, is it really enterprise grade? It's, you know, how do you say it? You know, I mean, you know, the normal things that we would all get when we talk about it. One of the things to remember is that big money equals dirty tricks, okay? And the amount of money that the proprietary software brings us is, you know, they have a lot of money. And so with that, open source is a direct attack on their revenue stream, right? Recurring licensing, everything like that. You know, for years we've been hearing, you know, IBM is, you know, just a hop, skip, and a jump away. You know, they're not doing well. They're not doing really good. This, you know, Cisco had a poor year or something like that. Well, they're not, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, a recent client of mine was trying to decide between Kamailio and a Cisco SBC. And one of the things that they said was Kamailio downloads are decreasing rapidly, so the project won't be around much longer. Which I was just, what? And so, you know, and this was like right after 5.0 had launched, right? And it was, I was a little shocked. I couldn't even, I'm like, where are they getting this information? You know, I'm looking at the commits. I'm looking at everything we could go. You know, I reached out to Daniel. I said, do you know any statistics on you know, how many people are downloading? And he's like, no, we're open source. They can get it however they want. Why would we care how many people are downloading the software? I mean, this is just made up information, okay? And it's made up information because some of the revenue reported, the last good numbers are from 2017, right? Cisco made $48 billion. IBM, which is hurting so bad, made $79 billion, right? This was their revenue, right? Oracle, Mitel, so poor, $1 billion. You know, I mean, wouldn't that be nice to be last on this list and still be $1 billion? These companies have a very profitable revenue model based on recurring licensing. And to keep that, they're going to use dirty tricks. They're going to spread rumors. They're going to make up lies. They're going to ask things in a way where even the question itself gives you a false impression in your mind. So that's great, you know, that Kamailio sounds really good, but is open source a safe solution? Implying that it's not. Just the question itself poisons you, right? And this is called FUD. And this is the biggest thing that consumers use against us, the commercial products use against you, and that's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If they can get any of those into the brain of someone that's trying to choose, then they can keep them from doing that, right? You know, I was gonna choose Kamailio, I wanted to, but I just didn't know if it was safe, so I'm choosing this Cisco solution that is just gonna bankrupt me and do nothing. But that's okay, because next year we'll charge them more to replace it, right? But but fear, uncertainty, and doubt, okay? Some of the two biggest players on it we purchased from, right? So Microsoft was notorious for FUD. Okay, they've been sued, they've paid money. Apple, right? So these are, you know, how many iPhones are there in here, right? So Apple and Microsoft were going after them, right? All of them. Cisco's fantastic at this. I gave the examples of Mitel earlier. All of them are, right? But they'll come up with disinformation strategies, right? And this is extremely popular. Just using FUD is extremely popular in sales, public relations, talk radio, et cetera. If anyone, I'm from America, and you know, so that's why my accent is just perfect. All right, so, but you know, our campaigns have been a lot of enjoyment for some of the world, and you can hear FUD just in the election speaks. Okay, it's great examples of what the same type of stuff is going in sales when they're trying to choose something. All right, Cisco has an incredible budget with that type of revenue where, you know, I can't go and take out the entire IT team out to dinner, right? Or especially the after dinner parties, right? We can't spend the type of money. We can't spend this type of thing. We can't play these dirty tricks that are just convincing the managers. This manager wants to choose Cisco because they buy him good steaks, right? He just thinks it's probably all the same, but look at what I get from Cisco, right? Look at what I get from this other company, right? But they do all these tricks and using this FUD just to influence the thoughts and to put these little seeds inside decision makers' brains and let them grow, right? And the bottom line is it's negative, false information, or as my country would say, false news. And they have alternative facts. They appeal to one's fear, right? And when you start attaching something to emotion, it's hard to shake, okay? And anyone that's married knows that, and so does our spouses, because we react the same way. So it's not that, you know, Jenny's the only person like that. You know, I have my fears. And this is both common in software and hardware. Mitel was that great example, that 6 major risks of open source phone systems, right? Just that question itself, just the question itself is FUD, okay? These are the 6 major risks. There are so many other risks that Mitel thankfully went through them all and combined it to just the 6 major ones, right? And then, you know, so just that puts it in that there's so many risks that they're just gonna catalog into it for the major ones. That's the perception of someone that doesn't know, right? And so, you know, the way I countered it was with my own FUD, but that never works, right? So, you know, because you can't always get what you want, choose Mitel, right? And make it look like a real ad and nobody notices. But that's just pure FUD. So, you know, you have to counter this, right? And there's many different ways that you can try to counter FUD. There's many different ways that you can address the FUD that is inevitably gonna hit you, okay? And the bottom line is the only way to do it is educate, educate, educate. And anyone that's done sales, and a lot of us are really small independent shops where we have to educate our customers. It's an expensive sales cycle. You know, in other words, you will spend more time convincing and educating your customer than you will in developing the product, right? I'd much rather play with Kamailio all day. I mean, that's why I got into this. I loved the product, right? When I went to, when we put in that OpenSARE and solved our Acme packet problem, I mean, I just fell in love. I fell in love with OpenSARE. I fell in love with Kamailio. I fell in love with this community, right? Educating a client as to why lies are lies is not something I love to do, right? It's not something that brings me joy. I'm sure it doesn't bring you guys joy either. You know, let's play the which is more secure game, right? But big companies will lie. You know, Volkswagen, you know, near and dear to Germany here, had a little problem with their clean diesel. You know, it ain't our daddy's diesel. I mean, companies will lie. I mean, they act like they're all dependable, but companies have a history of lying. They have a history of lying to make money. And this is an extremely good example of why. I mean, you know, this is a company that spent, instead of engineering a clean diesel, they engineered a method to get around the test, right? And so, you know, with their ultra sulfur fuel, direct injection technology, extreme efficiency, I think that little sidebar might mean more than it really means, but, you know, the companies have an interest of lying and an interest of putting out FUD, and that is their revenue model, right? So the best way to counter this is with strong evidence and to follow up with your customers, right? Cold, hard facts. When someone tells you, you know, Kamailio is open source is less secure. So, you know, are you sure that open source SIP server is less secure? Ask them for a source of data. Where'd you hear that we were less secure? Which immediately usually ends a conversation because it's just a rumor, right? No one has a source for a rumor. So don't fight FUD with FUD, just fight it with facts, you know? And it takes some time, and you will never convince some people. So accept that. You know, the easiest thing to do in life is sometimes accept that some people aren't playing the same game that you're playing, okay? I can't win at golf if the other guy's playing tennis, or one of us is going to lose just really badly. And so some people will never believe the truth, and sometimes that's the person who's going out to the really nice steak dinner. But if you keep it geared towards the customer's needs, we have a strong competitive advantage. The competitive advantage of open source has never been the price. The people that are attracted to open source for the price of it are generally not your best customers, right? Because they're going to immediately balk at the price that you're going to charge to help them because this is free product, right? The ones that are the best open source consumers are the ones that realize that open source solves a need. Open source provides a better solution, right? I never recommend Kamailio because it's free, okay? I recommend Kamailio because it's powerful. It's amazingly customizable. And we can gear this to provide the customer a solution that fits their needs. All right, your customers have a specific need. You know, we're not going, you know, usually my customers aren't Burger King and McDonald's where they're really just the same thing with a different mascot, right? They're trying to come up with a different unique business model, or they're trying to come up with something else, or their billing system is different. You know, on the proprietary systems, those are very hard to customize to fit that solution. Where in Kamailio, yes, sometimes we're reinventing the wheel, but we are customizing for their vehicle, right? And that's something that we can do. There's a group out there, Toto, totally open, and the D and the O is forgetting me, but this is a group of companies that have dedicated themselves to open source. I lost a little faith of the people here when you start seeing, like, you know, IBM and Microsoft are part of these companies, which have a long history of providing FUD towards open source. But there are companies out there that have decided that they will show that they use open source. So sometimes it's good to use some examples of this. You know, Netflix is a decent example. GitHub, clearly. You know, some of the other companies out there that are more open towards open source. I mean, Facebook probably 3 years ago was a really good example, but right now I don't know if it's such a, the connotation of just Facebook, I don't know if that's a good position to point to, but if you constantly present customers with facts and the fact that this solution fits a problem, then it's easier to dispel the myths that are caused by FUD. And with that, I thank you very much for your time today. I want to say how much I love this community. This is the thing that I come to. I really regret I didn't come to the first few, and we've rectified it by coming more often, but this community has been so strong and supportive of everyone that it's just an honor to be a part of. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. Mac is preparing, and we have time for a couple of questions. We have Tori. Henning, can you give to Tori?
Hi. One of the things you were saying was that it's good to back up the value of open source with hard facts. But one of the FUDs you were saying was about the downloads of Kamailio were dying, and we have no tracks of it. Would it be interesting to actually try to track how much traffic is to counteract claims that we aren't getting any users?
I might let Daniel put in a couple 2 cents on this. You know, I went through with him, and we started thinking about, okay, well, you know, should we counter this with some of the numbers? And we jokingly looked at some of the numbers that you could pull from GitHub. I was actually shocked with how many people were downloading it. I think I said, you know, how do this many people need Kamailio? But my thought personally was when something is so made up, such as that, you know, where this is just completely fabricated, no information at that point would change their mind, right? Because if I can't combine such a made-up lie with that, where that's one of the ones where I want to ask the source, you know, and make them feel.
I can add here because it's actually hard. I was in contact with Fred at that time, and I was like, oh, it's first time someone actually says such. And we have GitHub, and a lot of them are taking the code from there. But then we have packages which are hosted by Cipwise. Thank you, Cipwise, for Debian. And we have the RPMs, which are hosted by OpenSUSE build platform, so it's not by us. Then Debian, thanks to Victor, which probably had to leave, it's part of the official Debian distribution. So practically, you just do apt install, and it's there. So really, it's hard to put all this number together and show increase, decrease. We are not looking at, you know, phoning back to see how many people are running. And moreover, for example, Cipwise platform, they have their own clone because they need to backport patches. So whoever is using Cipwise C provider might take an update from that repository. So I was last time checking GitHub clones of or how they are called, forks of the repository are a couple of hundred. So everyone is kind of, and that's the reason you see commits from my side, like commit to the code and another commit for documentation is because I need to backport the code. And typically when committing to doing a big commit, you can get conflicts. Because customer comes and my contribution to Kamailio code is because I need that function for a stable release. But I can't really put it officially there. So I split it in small commits that I'm sure I don't have a conflict and I don't break too many things. So yeah, this is like a really poorest metric that someone could come up with in at least open source world. And you remember the WebRTC fight on the codec was because you couldn't measure how many downloads will be for your WebRTC application in order to see if you go over that threshold of the MPEG-4 patent license, because I think you could use it for 10,000 times for free, and then you have to pay. So yeah, it's hard to put it together as a project. So. Okay, Fred, really big thanks, and also for the cakes, and also for the caps that we had to give to the developers that were brought from Florida, and for your long flight from USA and the past editions. And we are staying in USA for the next speaker virtually because you're here in